Hello people. So before I get into the main subject matter of this video, if you just indulge me for a second, I just want to speak briefly about the passing of marvelous Marvin Hagler. Boxing fans, of course, will know who I'm talking about. If you're not a boxing fan, my apologies. I'll make this brief. He has died at the age of 66. Some are circulating an idea that this was something to do with the COVID vaccine. Had a negative reaction to it. I'm not going to give that much credence without much weight that is going around. Some people have a negative reaction to vaccines, but most don't. So who knows? Um, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, he actually had his name legally changed because he was tired. He was so fond of the adjective marvelous, and he was tired of that not being announced that he had it legally changed to Marvelous Marvin Hagler. It's only a few months since Alan Minter passed, and they had a famous or infamous clash in 1980. Um, Britain's fighter Alan Minter. Hagler was one of the greatest middleweights of all time. He's up there with, at least in the conversation, of greatest middleweights of people like Sugar Ray Robinson, um, Bernard Hopkins, Roy Jones Jr., and more recent years, of course, there's people like Gennady Golovkin, and I would argue Canelo Alvarez in recent years. But definitely Hagler, he was one of the four kings of the 80s. Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Marvin Hagler, and Tommy Hearns. And his epic clash in 1985, here I was born, with Tommy Hearns is generally considered one of the greatest fights of all time. That's 2 minutes now, so I'll round it up there. If you're still listening, thank you. But I just wanted to say that because I might not be making a specific video on it. So rest in peace, marvelous Marvin Hagler. Um, okay, so the events around what's happened in London have got a lot of attention regarding the murder of Sarah Everard. Um, just a quick disclaimer here. This is someone's daughter, um, and if I get any sort of solicitation on my previous video, for example, from her family, that they don't want that, to be in a video, I would respect their wishes and take it down. I always feel a little bit unsure about videos like that, but I think if something is in the public domain, even a sensitive murder case, and it's being reported and there's controversial issues around it, it's legitimate to talk about those issues because I've always taken an approach of touching on taboo subjects, on controversial subjects, on socio-political subjects. So that's why I felt it was a valid thing to discuss. Um, but like I say, if I get any sort of solicitation from her family, I would of course respect their wishes and take it down. In no way do I want to be disrespectful. Um, when looking at a case like this, it's always important to put the victim first and to consider the victim and their family. Um, Unfortunately, though, this has turned into quite a big story because of a few different factors, and there's a lot of points and counterpoints and things to look at. So, one thing is the way the police handled the vigil. There's actually a few more layers to that that people need to consider. Um, on the surface, my response was it seemed a bit heavy handed, and it's hard not to draw a comparison with the Black Lives Matter protests last year and the hands off approach to that versus how this was handled. Um, when it came to the Black Lives Matter protests, it was basically free reign. Police officers were taking the knee. I really think that was a mistake for the Mayor of London to allow those protests to go ahead, but then not to allow counter protests. And it just felt to me like a powder keg situation. You either apply one standard to everyone or not at all. So I think that's a problem. And I think the police's handling of that, which did seem a bit rough, it's not good optics, especially since the suspect is one of their own. So, you could picture the situation. However, there is another side to this, which is that technically they were breaking lockdown regulations on social gathering. Now, the organisers, which include a group called Reclaim Our Streets, say that if the police had organised it with them, then they could have done it in a COVID friendly way. Well, if some of those people die from COVID or get COVID, that isn't helping Sarah Everard's family. It isn't helping them. So, in that sense, perhaps it is a little bit reckless. I also understand, and I have to emphasize, is I haven't found a solid source for this, but some are saying that Sarah Everard's own family was against the vigil, at least in that context. Whether they felt it would, um, attract controversy because it was breaking regulations and they didn't want that to be associated on top of their grief, or they just didn't want it done that way, I'm not sure. But certainly their wishes should have been respected. And if the organisers just disregarded that because they wanted to push an agenda, that's wrong. Um, what I think is very sad about this case is that what is the murder of a young woman has now descended into this nauseating war of the sexes, in the sense that some are really trying to turn this into a male versus female issue, which I think is really unfortunate. I remain very critical of Baroness Jones. I get the argument she was supposedly making a sarcastic reply to the police saying that women should stay indoors. I'm referring here to the Green Peer Baroness Jones, who said that who proposed that there should be a curfew of all men. Now, even if she didn't mean that literally, that was an inflammatory and stupid thing to say. And just imagine that with any other demographic. Imagine if there'd been an Islamist attack, and I know I made this example before, but it's a valid one, and then suddenly a politician proposed to ban all Muslims from using public transport. It would be absolutely discriminatory. So I don't buy this argument, oh, well, we're just putting the shoe on the other foot, so to speak, because most men haven't said women should stay indoors. That hasn't been, people are using that to justify her inflammatory rhetoric, but I haven't actually seen many people say that. There is a difference between offering sensible advice versus telling women what to do. If anyone is trying to blame the victim, that's despicable. But I honestly haven't seen anyone do that. Saying that it's practical for women to be vigilant and maybe not go out alone at night time. I don't see how that is victim blaming. That's just sensible. It's like if you live in an area that has a high burglary rate and you leave your door open and a burglar comes in, it's not your fault. It's ultimately the fault of the burglar, but it's still, perhaps irresponsible. So if a young woman goes out late at night with maybe no protection, um, it's never her fault what happens, but is it really victim blaming to say that that is perhaps a little bit reckless? I don't think it's victim blaming. I think it's just talking about vigilance. This is not to say the onus should be on women not to go out. I don't think that should be the case. Well, actually, we can't with limits on going out anyway because of lockdown. But as a general principle, I think too often victim blaming is conflated with just reasonable advice. It's not the same thing. But I think there is a lot of manipulation going on in this case. I've had quite a lot of dialogue, discussion, debate, most of it civil, I have to say, but nevertheless, it's clear there's differences of opinion on this. From female friends who probably would describe themselves as feminists. Um, one of them said that this has ramifications for women all over the country, but the obvious follow-up there is, well, why? In this case, the main suspect has already been apprehended. So it's not like we're talking about someone who's on the loose and other women are at a threat from the same man. He's been apprehended. Um, Also, statistically, in this country, the chances of a woman being kidnapped and murdered, as Davina McCall said, the presenter Davina McCall pointed this out, is extremely low. That's just a fact. Jess Phillips read out the names of 118 women murdered by men last year. That's 118 too many. It's awful. But you have to weigh that up against a population of over 30 million women in this country. We have 68 million people. You could be sure at least half of that is going to be female, probably a bit more. So let's say 34 million. That doesn't, it's no comfort to the families of those women who are killed, but I do think context matters. There are parts of the world where femicide is a very real problem. There are villages in Mexico where basically half the entire female population has just disappeared. That is not the situation in this country. And I do think it is irresponsible for some of these organisers to sort of frankly scaremonger the public, scare women. And the consequence of that, of course, is if women are being scared into thinking that they're going to be the next Sarah Everard, then inevitably, well, men are the enemy. It's men who are doing it. So it's very, very manipulative. It's manipulative because it goes without saying that the vast majority of men not only are not rapists and murderers, but would absolutely shun those men who are. But that brings me to another point about this. Feminists have been saying men need to step up. Men need to, well, that's really a question, isn't it? What are men expected to do? Decent people condemn what's happened and offer sympathy to the family. That is a decent response. But frankly, this idea that there should be an onus on all men in the United Kingdom, that's absurd. You cannot hold responsibility for all men because of the actions of dangerous, bad men. What is the onus on any citizen would be, report the police if you see something suspicious, report to the police. Of course, in this case, it was an officer involved. So I think the Met really need to check their vetting process. But this idea that all men have a responsibility to generically protect women, it's a bit archaic. Because frankly, men can't win. If and this is controversial. Anything that provokes feminists is controversial, unfortunately. But consider the situation: if a man does step in, then he's being patronizing, or he has ulterior motives. He just wants to get in bed with her. If he tries being a decent man. I was talking to some male friends today, and they were saying they've been in situations where they have intervened. For example, if a woman's being attacked by a violent husband or boyfriend, the woman has then turned on them. You know, um, that's the price of being a decent man these days, more often than not. I'm not, by the way, saying that would be the response of all women. There would be other women who would be grateful and recognize that he was trying to help. So I'm not suggesting that all women would respond that way, but it does happen. Um, Personally speaking, I would be protective of women in my life, family members, friends. To cite a personal example, a friend of mine who's not from the UK, so that added a dynamic because she didn't know my city. She'd visited me. I'd invited her to dinner because I wanted to thank her for some help she'd given me with various things. And she wasn't a girlfriend. We were just friends, and I wanted to invite her around for dinner. And there was another friend there as well, actually. But anyway, it was getting quite late. The taxi lines were very busy that night for some reason. Buses had stopped running. It was about 11:30. Um, she could have stayed over. We have a guest room, but she had something to do the next day, so she wanted to go home. Well, where she lived was about 3 miles from where I live. Now, I know this city pretty well, so I basically offered to accompany her home, and she accepted. Then that was it. We walked back. Um, she thanked me for being with her. We said good night, and that was it. Now, Some would be cynical and say, "Oh, you were just trying to get into her, get into bed with her." Um, no, that isn't the way I would approach it. If I fancied a girl, if I wanted to do that, would go about it another way. I'm quite old fashioned. I'd probably invite her for a coffee or something. I don't know. Certainly wouldn't be that method. I genuinely wanted to make sure she was safe because I know in my city, although it's relatively safe, we have our share of drunks, you know. And for a young woman going home at night from another country, I just didn't want her to have to deal with that. So I didn't want to have to say, well, please just text me when you get home. You know, I just didn't want that situation. Yes, it was a bit of a walk. I was going out of my way, but it gave me the peace of mind in knowing that she was safe. Some might say I was white knighting. Well, all I can say is it's not something I would do with everyone. She was a friend, and I just wanted to make sure she was safe. Um, the only reason I'm mentioning that is just to kind of highlight the point that not all men have cynical motives. I do think that there is a very, very strong um, misandric overtones to the way feminists talk about things. I'm not suggesting that individual feminists are anti-male, but I think as a collective body, there is undeniably a very, very anti-male overtone. Apparently, people have been saying things on forums. I didn't see this directly, but one of my friends mentioned this, that there were statements like, not all men are rapists, but all rapists are men, which is technically true, but the message is men are the enemy, even though the majority of men, won't do that. I totally understand women being vigilant, you know, um, but frankly, from a male perspective, if I'm walking on the street and there's a woman in front of me, that makes me uncomfortable on the grounds that I'm kind of wary that she might be uncomfortable. Frankly, I'll cross to the other side of the street. So, feminists never consider that. They just consider male power, men can't say anything. Um, in terms of statistics, the majority of murder victims in this country are male. That's just a fact. And yeah, of course, the majority of perpetrators are also male. But this ties into this thing about scaremongering. Obviously, if you add other crimes like sexual assaults, that's going to be a lot higher than the murder rate. But I do think it matters because, frankly, I think these vigil organizers are. I was sympathetic to them on some level, but I also think they're scaremongering a bit. Um, but when it comes to the way feminists see things, you really, really do have to tread carefully because even if you tell them what they want to hear, you could be. I'll give an example. I raised this issue on my Facebook timeline as a discussion point, and I really tried hard to put the focus on the victim and to put the focus on women's safety and that sort of thing. And I just put in the caveat that, criticizing Baroness Jones's point of view. Even with that, even trying to be as diplomatic as possible, trying to really understand the point of view of women who are concerned about this. No, that wasn't enough. It still meant one of my feminist contacts gave me a little angry emoji. She didn't bother explaining why. But this sort of thing happens all the time. You know, as a man, basically, you can't do anything right in the eyes of a feminist. They say that they aren't anti-male. They say that they don't hate men. Maybe individually they don't. But frankly, a lot of men are fed up with the never-ending male shaming and the collective male shaming, which is pretty obvious from this case. So yes, a man cannot know what it's like to be in a woman's shoes. I totally accept that. But frankly, women can't know what it's like to be in a man's shoes either. Can we just stop this constant battle of the sexes and trying to point score? It's just nauseating. The majority of men are not bad guys. There are fathers, brothers, husbands, boyfriends. They want the women in their lives to be safe. They want guys like this taken off the streets. And actually, you'll find most men, if you have, I would argue there's a dynamic. If you have a group of guys in any given situation, and let's say there was one woman in that group, probably the chances are the men would be quite defensive of her or kind of just wary that, she is physically the most vulnerable amongst them. So this constant male shaming, it's BS. And I'm tired of the manipulation that if men speak out, then they're somehow, you know, ignoring the victim. It's like no matter what you say, feminists will find some angle to attack. Oh, you're a man. It's mansplaining. Or you can't know what a woman feels like. Or you're downplaying these things. No, no, no. I mean, even criticizing feminism gives a stigma because if you criticize it, oh, well, you must be against women's rights. I reserve my right to criticize any ideology or movement. I don't have to prove anything to anyone. I know what I believe. And I actually said to one of these women that I was debating that I personally believe the consequences for domestic abusers are too lenient. There was a case recently, which I mentioned, of that guy that had beaten up his girlfriend, and the judge gave him a tap on the wrist. So I, as a man, am saying that violent man needs a tougher punishment. And she kind of acknowledged that, but she was still very much looking at the angle of, you know, trying to find critique in things I was saying, rather than just acknowledging, well, yeah, actually, I am acknowledging, I am trying to reach out and understand or at least appreciate the things that you're saying. But like I say, when it comes to debating feminists, honestly, I do believe that men can't win because if you try to be polite and friendly and try to see their point of view, then more often than not, it's, you're being patronizing. If you debate with them and you see a different point of view, then you're a sexist. And another thing is how misogyny is just thrown around as a concept. And there's a lot of manipulation in this because when Baroness Jones was getting criticism, there were female feminists there. I say female because the male counterparts are just as bad, but they say things like, oh, the backlash against her shows the misogyny in our society. No, it just shows that men don't like being tarred with the same brush. Men don't like crude generalizations any more than women do. Why is it okay to make these lazy generalizations of men? Why is that the only, frankly, white straight men are the only demographic which is fair game. It's the truth. White straight men are the only demographic where people can throw out bigotry and generalizations and basically get away with it in a way that others wouldn't. I don't think that's paranoia. I think there's empirical evidence for that. Um, but ultimately, this just saddens me, foremost because a young woman has lost her life, but also because of the way it's turned into this male versus female thing. When the normal and decent response should just be, let's hope her family gets justice. By the way, these feminists don't speak for all women because there's a lot of open minded women who know full well that men know what this situation is and are condemning it and, have said the things that I've said in terms of wanting the victim to get justice. So these feminists don't speak for all women. Um, I think Davina McCall pointed out the fact that male mental health is a very profound problem. So if men are constantly being vilified, no wonder they're getting depressed. No wonder they're thinking that, we are cast as the villains of society. Feminists deny that. They say they don't do it. Well, every time you talk about men in a collective sense, that's exactly what you're doing. Men need to, square up. Men need to improve. Men need to do this, that, and the other. It's not bad men need to do this. But of course, another point is that the bad men out there, men who do abuse women, men who are rapists, they're not going to change their behaviour because of some article in the Guardian lambasting all men, or because of placards um, telling men in general to change. That won't change bad men. All it will do is polarize good men. So I do think there's a lot of manipulation around this. And it's sad because it puts men on the defensive, and then women get on the defensive because they think men are trivializing it, and it just becomes this really unfortunate battle of the sexes. And I just think that's very sad. I'll round this up. Apparently, there's going to be a big investigation into the Met. Priti Patel has called for a full investigation. Commissioner Cressida Dick isn't going to resign, which isn't surprising. Um, I've some sympathy with the police because technically they were just upholding the law, but there is a perception of double standards. And I think they need to be very careful in terms of how they police things like this when it was one of their own officers who was apprehended. By the same token, though, the vigil organisers need to be responsible and not scaremonger and not tell women that they're in this imminent danger. That is scaremongering because statistically it isn't true. Statistically, the chances of a woman being kidnapped and murdered in this country are very low. So this taps into what I was saying about facts versus feelings. Because a lot of women might be feeling scared. Are they feeling scared because there's a real danger, or because they're getting all this, they're bombarded with this information about how dangerous things are, when actually they're not, at least not to that extent. I'm not saying it never happens, and I'm not saying women shouldn't be vigilant, but I do think there's scaremongering with this and a lot of manipulation. Right, thanks for watching. I'd particularly like to hear from female subscribers actually on this one. I get a lot of contribution from my male subscribers, and that's great. You guys I appreciate that. But I want to hear some contribution from female subscribers too. Even if you disagree with me, please have your say. I'd like to know what your perspective is. Thanks for watching.